Hello and welcome to the Wake Up Call podcast. Today I'm speaking with Ms. Tracy Diaz about WikiLeaks and the emails and documents they have recently published. Ms. Diaz has a YouTube channel under Tracy D and has released numerous videos related to the recent WikiLeaks publications on that channel. You can follow her work on her YouTube channel at youtube.com/TracyBeans. That's youtube.com/Tracy with a Y and Beans with a Z, B-E-A-N-Z. You can find her on Twitter at Tracy Beans, again Beans with a Z, and on Facebook under facebook.com/Tracy Beans, and again Beans with a Z there as well. For more information, please see the show notes page for this episode at wakeupcallpodcast.com/WikiLeaks-emails. Tracy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for joining me. So let's just get started with a basic definition and a little background. What is WikiLeaks?
WikiLeaks is a publishing organization. They receive information about governments and institutions, and they, in turn, publish those documents unedited to their website for the world to see.
Okay, and who is Julian Assange, and why is he living at the Ecuadorian embassy in London right now?
Well, Julian Assange is the editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks. He began his career as a hacker, I guess you could say. He began, dumping this information way back in 2004. And, of course, governments are not happy about this, so he lived in Sweden. They appear to have fabricated some charge against him for rape. He is actually not charged with the crime right now, but he received asylum from Ecuador. So he's holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy in London because he fears if he steps out of that London, he'll be extradited to the United States and or Sweden. Interestingly, the United Nations has come out and said that what is going on right now is actually a human rights violation to no avail. So he's basically a political prisoner, as we speak.
Okay, and can you give an overview of some of what WikiLeaks has previously published? Just a little taste to give everyone a sense of what their past work is so that we can then better understand their more recent work.
Absolutely. They released many documents on Stratfor, which is a global intelligence agency based out of Texas. Posted information from the Democratic National Committee. They posted information that was leaked to them from Chelsea Manning, who's right now in solitary confinement for what she's done. They posted the documents for TPP and TPP's cousin, TISA, T-I-S-A. They've posted other documents from Russian government as well. So they basically hit every angle possible in opening governments, which is what their tagline is: we open governments. Okay.
So now let's turn our attention to what they've done recently. I want to get into some of the specific documents and some of the specific revelations in a little bit. But can you just give an overview of what WikiLeaks has released during this entire election cycle and as pertains to the United States within the last several months?
Absolutely. They began their leaks with emails that came from within the Democratic National Committee, and then began immediately, a month or so after, releasing those with over 50,000 emails from John Podesta's email. So everything that we've been seeing for the month of October has come from John Podesta.
Okay, and just to make sure everyone's on the same page, can you tell us who John Podesta is?
John Podesta is labeled one of the most influential men in Washington. He worked with Barack Obama in the White House. He is Hillary Clinton's campaign manager. He ran and founded CAP, Center for American Progress. He's a well-known lobbyist. He also has a few companies on the side with his brother Tony. He's basically the machine personified.
All right, yeah, that's definitely one way of describing him. One of the things that's been maybe not fascinating about the WikiLeaks publications of the last several months, but at least revealing, and we're seeing this as well with the FBI, is the attitudes and opinions expressed from people throughout the political landscape, and how their attitudes seem to change based on whether it looks like their party is benefiting or not from these decisions and from what is being published. Because if we go back a handful of years ago, we saw a lot of people on the left and a lot of Democrats praising WikiLeaks and a lot of harsh criticisms on the right. And now it's more or less flipped entirely to where you have people like Sean Hannity and people on Fox News praising WikiLeaks, and you have the exact opposite from people on the left.
That's absolutely true. And I always point that out to liberals that are challenging WikiLeaks and saying how criminal what they're doing is. I say all the time, you guys were lauding him as a champion just a few years ago. The shoe's on the other foot now. They're not biased. They basically show it like it is. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah, so let's get into some of what WikiLeaks has released. And let's start out with what they released about the Democratic National Committee and what they released regarding Bernie Sanders' primary campaign and the way the system was rigged, I guess we could say, against him, and what was also released about Debbie Wasserman-Schultz that ultimately led to her ouster as chair of the DNC. So what was released there, and what were some of the really big revelations from that release of documents?
It was basically, as a whole, collusion, just massive amounts of collusion, internal emails between candidates about how they could disrupt Bernie Sanders' campaign, how they could target him. Now, this is the Democratic National Committee. This is not Hillary Clinton's campaign. It was startling to see the level of just manipulation. And now, actually, in the leaks that came out today, it was actually yesterday evening at around 9 p.m., that they had a deal. They speak openly about the deal they made with Bernie. So they actually did broker a deal with him. And they worked within the confines of that deal, who was supposed to say what, who couldn't say what. And it seems that Bernie Sanders stepped outside the limits that were placed upon him several times. And, how they spoke frequently about how journalists should not anger Bernie supporters to a certain extent because they'd need them when the general election came around. It was quite clear from the DNC leaks that the entire primary was rigged from the get-go, superdelegates included, and they didn't really they needed the votes, but the result was preordained.
Right, and of course, as you referenced there with the superdelegates, the very setup from the start made it such that it was stacked against Bernie tremendously. But these leaks really helped us understand how it's even more stacked than it looked like on paper, and it was even more in the pocket for Hillary than we could have imagined.
Yeah, and I really would give anything to see what came out of the RNC for that same time period, to be honest. But yes, the Democratic primaries are set up in a way that are just ridiculously skewed for whomever holds the power strings at that point in time.
Right, and of course in regards to the RNC, it did seem to be stacked against Trump in many ways, and of course we've seen these processes stacked against candidates in the past. Ron Paul, perhaps one of the more notable examples in recent years. So of course this probably is happening to tremendous degrees with both the DNC and the RNC. But
what?
Yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, as a long-time Ron Paul supporter, I worked on both of his campaigns on the presidential level, and we were screaming this stuff from the rooftops, as you know, when it was happening, but there just weren't enough people awake to it at that time for it to make much of a difference. So it's a vindication, and I'm sure you'll agree, in a way, to have people see that, no, we're not just those crazy tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorists. We were actually right.
Right. Now, on the subject of WikiLeaks and the Republican Party, have there been any documents released related to Donald Trump or his campaign? Because that seems to have been a criticism from some on the left, that WikiLeaks seems to be going after Hillary Clinton and that they're not releasing materials related to Donald Trump. Is that true? Is that the case?
It's not that they're not releasing them. It's that they don't have them. They said it numerous times, give us the information and we'll be happy to vet it, make sure it's legitimate and publish it. But they just didn't have those documents to provide. So They're providing what they have that they were able to verify using their methods, and they can't make things up and stick them out there. They have a perfect 10-year track record of never getting it wrong.
Right. No, they have a very impressive track record. So let's look at WikiLeaks' sources for a moment, and then we'll dig into the documents and the Podesta emails a little bit. But generally, forgetting about the last year or so, but just in general, in regards to WikiLeaks, what sorts of sources provide them with these documents to release? What sorts of protections does WikiLeaks provide for their sources? What do the levels of redaction look like? What does that whole process generally look like?
Okay, so that's a bunch of questions. I'll take, I think, one at a time. WikiLeaks
Sure.
does not ever divulge their sources, ever. They keep their sources very confidential. The one source that we do know, and I may be wrong about this, so listeners don't kill me, but I believe Chelsea Manning is one of the sources that was identified by WikiLeaks as providing information to them about the United States military operations overseas. Otherwise, we don't know who their sources are. They have hinted towards who some of these sources may be, hinting towards Seth Rich as possibly being the source that provided him the DMC emails. Of course, Seth Rich was murdered in Washington just several months back. But they don't say their sources out loud. There don't seem to be any redactions in their information at all, contrary to what the FBI does when they release emails and documents. They redact everything. You can barely read what's going on. WikiLeaks does not redact their information. They publish it as is. And did I miss a question?
Well, yeah, on the subject of the redactions, that has been a criticism of WikiLeaks, is that they're not redacting information related to innocent third-party individuals who are just mentioned in passing in these documents. And I think Glenn Greenwald, who of course was very much a part of the Snowden publications, has had that criticism.
Yes, you don't see any redaction, but you also don't see a whole ton of really personal information. Although I've seen passport numbers, I've seen not from WikiLeaks, but I've seen from the Guccifer information that's come out, Social Security numbers. None of that has been in WikiLeaks, though. I haven't seen a Social Security number as of yet. I have seen telephone numbers, but how personal is a telephone number? I don't think that they could keep the integrity of what they're doing intact and redact. I think they would be looked at as skewing information one way or the other. If you redact one thing, you know what I mean? So I think that's
Right.
why they take that road.
Okay, yeah. And the other thing I asked you about in that massive chunk of questions that was probably hard to follow was about WikiLeaks' protection of their sources. So what have we seen with that in the past, and what have we seen with the protection of their more recent sources?
They don't release their sources. They go to great lengths to keep them confidential and offer them, they offer them, I guess, protection and confidentiality. However, like I said, when there's a direct assault on one of their purported sources, they did come out and for the first time ever basically say, we're offering a $20,000 reward in response to anyone who can come forward with information about the death of Seth Rich. One could assume, even though they never said that was a source, that was one of their sources. And Julian Assange made it rather clear that was one of their sources. Chelsea Manning is also high on their list. They're constantly running campaigns to try and help Chelsea Manning with legal expenses and pardon requests and all sorts of other help for her. She's having a hard time in prison right now. So,
sure, and it's just horrible, the treatment she's received and the conditions she's been living under. But on the subject of WikiLeaks sources, there's been a lot of chatter, especially among people close to the Hillary Clinton campaign and people who are acting as surrogates on her behalf. But beyond that, also, there's been a ton of chatter in the mainstream media and elsewhere in the American political landscape about some sort of connection between the Russian government and the sources and release of these documents. Now, I heard Julian Assange in an interview with John Pilger basically deny that the other day. Is there any reason to think that there's any Russian government involvement? Where is this idea coming from? Is it just political spin?
Absolutely. It's blame the Russians. I mean, it's quite clear what the campaign is doing. The Clinton campaign originated that, and WikiLeaks has come out and disavowed that, and actually have disavowed their statement that 17 intelligence agencies were, on the same page when they said that the information came from Russia. Russia's disavowed it. It's just a political spin right now, using Russia very irresponsibly as a scapegoat. However, there was a video that came out last week with Steve Pieczenik, who stated that the NSA and other intelligence agencies were responsible for providing this information to WikiLeaks. There's some, chatter about whether or not this is actually a legitimate claim. However, I, having studied about Steve Pieczenik for years and years, do not feel that he would come out and say that this is the case if it wasn't. And it also follows along the pattern that we're seeing with this information and how it could have been possibly obtained. There's a whole rabbit hole to go down with that, but I will say that it's pretty clear that Russia is not behind WikiLeaks right now.
Okay. All right. And one more topic I want to get to before we dive into the more recent documents that have been published, and that's where to find these publications. I guess most of their publications probably go on their website, wikileaks.org, correct? But if someone wants to look at these WikiLeaks documents, where would they go, and what would they expect to find when they're trying to find specific documents?
Well, they would go to wikileaks.org. It's a clunky search feature. It's very detailed, but it's very clunky. What I do, you can sort in the Podesta emails by release date, so you can sort when the WikiLeaks release was from. You can sort by release date. You can sort by oldest email. You can sort by keyword. You can sort by email address. You can, and they have a list of how to navigate through the searches. Other earlier dumps, that release date function is not available. And usually on WikiLeaks Twitter, they'll give you a direct link to what they've released. So in other words, in the DNC emails, they created the search line for you. If you clicked the link, it brought you right there to everything that was recently released. Also, today they released all of Podesta's emails up through yesterday, I believe, in a file you can download and read through Outlook. So you can open up that file in Outlook or on an iMac, and you can look these emails within your actual email application. So that's to do it as well.
Okay, all right. So let's get into these documents they've released, and they've obviously released tens of thousands of documents. So congratulations to you on being able to keep up with this to some degree. I know it's a lot of stuff to dig through, but what exactly have they released, and what sorts of patterns have you seen in both the documents and the way the documents have been released?
Yeah, they did release them very interesting in a very interesting way. The first steps were basically to show media collusion and discredit the media completely. So they started releasing all the documents between the journalists and Podesta and the Clinton camp, and what should I say here? Is this okay? Can you approve this before I publish it? Then they went on to begin to release information that was a little bit more of the corruption angle. The Clinton Foundation was peppered in there a lot, and you're starting to kind of get a better picture of what's about to come. It seems like the third set of information, and I say set, I mean maybe over the course of a week or so for each, it showed how much they actually hate each other. So you could look at these emails, and if they were now looking at them as the rest of the world was, they'd probably be at each other's throats with the way they spoke about each other behind one another's backs. Then they started bringing the president in. I feel like that was an almost like no one is untouchable move. And they started bringing in a lot of how his cabinet was picked before the election even happened. And then they got into the real nitty gritty, the high level sort of corruption, the Supreme Court tampering and the Clinton Foundation and all the journalists going back and forth with them and the debate questions. And it got crazy. And now they're just, I think, hitting the end of Podesta And I'm curious to see what comes out tomorrow. Today's was a little boring after you start reading these things for so long, you get bored by normal corruption and you want something bigger. It's really sad, but it's legitimately true. Like, I'm like, okay, I know this already. I know they're horrible. Let's see something better. This is horribly boring now. But I did find a whopper the other day. So once we get on that, I'll share.
Okay, yeah, talk about that right now. What was the whopper you just found the other day?
Well, okay. So it was email. I even wrote down the email ID because I want people to go and look at this. Seriously, it's email ID 48627. So if you go to the WikiLeaks page and you go to the Podesta files and you search by email ID on the third tab and you put this email ID in, it's from Neera Tanden, who is now the president of Center for American Progress, and she was an activist, and John Podesta kind of took her under his wing. And then it was to Jake Sullivan, who is one of Hillary Clinton's senior policy advisors, works very closely with her in the campaign. They're going back and forth with one another about a set of rules that should be kind of unleashed about like lowering corruption in government and how they can keep government transparent. And the second point on their list was about bribery and how you should stop that. And they basically spoke amongst one another. And Jake says, well, that's a really dicey subject for Clinton? We really shouldn't get into that. And Neera Tanden says, yeah, I know, but, we have to try and stay away from that with Clinton. Like, they're literally admitting that she engages in pay-for-play and bribery. Now, pay-for-play to me is just a nice way of saying this woman is bought and sold on a daily basis. It was just that outlandish that I was like, I can't believe that nobody else is talking about this right now. It was that big. That was one that was in there the other day. And that on top of Doug Band, who was president of the Clinton Foundation and then later started Teneo, which is a private consulting group that funneled a ton of money from huge corporations back to the Clinton Foundation, is basically saying, Chelsea Clinton got a sniff that something was up. And she basically started an internal audit by a third-party auditing firm. And that just drove everybody crazy because obviously you don't want to be audited when you're that corrupt of an organization. So Doug Band basically lost his mind and started yelling, you better get her out of this. She's taking money for her wedding. She's living in her condo because of the foundation money. I don't do anything that Bill Clinton doesn't do. He accepts money for speeches. He doesn't have to sign, it's escaping me right now. Ethics agreements is a good word for it. That was another crazy one that came out. I could talk about this for hours, so you just interrupt me whenever you want. So
okay, sure, yeah, but you mentioned that one of the big sort of categories they've been releasing emails on is the Clinton Foundation. So in addition to Chelsea asking questions about this and Chelsea living in a condo and having a wedding that was more or less paid for off of Clinton Foundation donations, what are some of the other major things we've learned about the Clinton Foundation from these emails that we didn't already know about?
Oh, goodness. Clinton Foundation is basically just a front for a money laundering scheme. The good folks over on Reddit did a whole expose on the Clinton Foundation that sums it up better than I ever could. I did a video about it. If people go to my channel, you'll see it. Basically, the Clinton Foundation accepts money from all over the world, countries, foreign governments, and they never really use that money for its purpose, but they use it to broker deals between power players in green energy, in petro, in oil, in uranium, in all of these different areas. They went down to Haiti. That's well known. They did not spend really any money helping Haiti. It's deals to enrich the pockets of lots of times very shady people under the guise of a charity, and it's disgusting and despicable. Dealing with an office within our government that's responsible for state secrets and security, and Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State was implicated 30,000 times over in paid play using the Clinton Foundation as a guise. And the White House actually allowed this to happen, okayed the speeches that Bill Clinton gave, given the ties, and they were complicit in all of it, which is mind-boggling. And this is not really being spoken about at length yet on the mainstream media, of course.
Oh, of course, and we'll never hear about it at length in the mainstream media. But speaking of the mainstream media, you mentioned that some of the first releases related to collusion between the mainstream media and Hillary Clinton's campaign and her close associates. Now, the collusion that's probably gotten the most attention was Donna Brazile, who's now the interim head of the DNC, during her time as a contributor at CNN and ABC, emailing town hall and debate questions to the Clinton campaign ahead of time. But what have some of the other big revelations regarding media collusion been?
Most prevalent and almost throughout all is how the media is going to cover certain topics. Do you want us to say anything about the emails? How do you want us to frame the emails? Hey, guys, I'm putting this story out in a week. Here's a quote I wrote for you. Can you okay it for me? Can you change it if you need? It just goes so deep. I mean, the debate questions, interview questions for Republican candidates. They get advice from, if you're going to find anybody within the inner workings of the Clinton campaign that had a half a brain that's on the left, I would urge you to search the WikiLeaks emails for Brent Badowski. He's been screaming about the red flags of this campaign to Podesta since day one, but he's always writing stories that are pro-Clinton. But he's got it right. So if you want to see what the inside of the campaign really is about and what they really think, look at the emails between Brent Badowski and John Podesta. It'll tell you everything you need to know right there. Okay,
all right. Yeah, his name has come up an awful lot in regards to the media collusion, and his role, I guess we could say, has been rather fascinating. But let's get into the fighting among themselves category. Of course, there's been speculation for years that the Clintons and the Obamas don't like each other, and about some other sort of factions, I guess we could say, within this group. But what have we learned from these emails about the fighting among themselves and who likes whom and who doesn't like whom and whatnot?
Well, nobody likes Chelsea Clinton. They think she's a spoiled brat. They say it several times. Nobody likes her. They think she's just living on her parents' coattails. Brent Badowski actually wrote a scathing email to John Podesta outlining again how much contempt Obama has for the Clintons, absolutely despises the Clintons, and makes it very known in that email how bad that actually goes. They just don't, they'll say, oh, she's going to, just like her mom, she'll stab you in the back while looking over your shoulder, or stab you in the front while looking over your shoulder, basically saying they're backstabbing and they have no integrity whatsoever. They just talk badly about one another, and Podesta just seems to be the sponge for it all. He's almost like the noble, like the grandfather looking over the whole mass of people, never really interjecting his opinion per se, but just kind of acting as the buffer between all this catty infighting that goes on between the group. Really interesting. You'd never see this if it weren't for WikiLeaks, and it's really interesting.
Yeah, no, it is. Although DC Leaks, I think it was, released some of Colin Powell's emails, and there was some information about infighting between the Clintons and the Obamas in those.
Yes, and DC Leaks was closed to the public for a long time. Only journalists were able to get in there. For a brief period, they opened it up, and then it was closed down again. So that was limited, what the public was actually allowed to get into inside of there. But there's so much other stuff that people should be screaming about. They literally influenced, and John Roberts was intimidated into his Supreme Court decision on Obamacare. I mean, they say it in black and white. We put the pressure on him, who knows how, to make this decision. And now we're going to need to do it again for this decision. And there's a lot of talk about Scalia in there. As a matter of fact, George Soros' foundation, shortly after Scalia died, sent an email to John Podesta saying, remember that justice we spoke about in Texas? And they're talking about who they're going to appoint to the Supreme Court. Similarly, we learned that Citigroup is actually the one who's pulling the strings on Obama's cabinet. Everyone on Obama's cabinet was appointed by the chairman of Citigroup before Obama was even elected in the elections in the United States. They had planning meetings as far back as I can see of August of 2008. They knew this man was going to be president, and they stacked him with banksters and special interests before he even had a vote cast for him. Very interesting.
Yeah, and of course, a lot of the names that were listed in the WikiLeaks email related to Obama's cabinet as handpicked by Citibank, a lot of those names, most of those names, ended up in those exact positions, or if not in the exact positions outlined in the email, at least in a very similar position.
Absolutely. And if that doesn't scare you, I don't know what will, because the other thing that I learned, being from the Ron Paul era, I always thought, our votes don't matter. They don't care about our vote. They pick the president. I think that in most elections that may be close to true, but they spend a lot of money trying to figure out how people are going to vote and what kind of messaging will affect their vote. So I do feel like there still is a shred of integrity in the electoral process based off of what I've researched and read, which was a nice feeling out of all this gloom and doom.
Sure. Now, I do want to return to the Brent Badowski subject a little bit. Can you give a little more clarity on just who he is and what his role is, since we have mentioned his name a few times?
Yeah, Brent Badowski is a writer. He writes for HuffPo, the Wall Street Journal. He's just basically an at-large author, but he's very, very tied to power brokers in Washington, the Clinton family, etc. And he serves almost as an informal advisor to Podesta on the Clinton campaign and what he grabs from, inside the walls of Washington that other people are saying. People trust him. They come to him constantly with information, and he shares that information in a very frank way with the Clinton campaign. He does not mince words. He tells it exactly like it is. And, I almost find myself cheering for Brent every time I see an email come through, because he actually gets it spot on, exactly right every time. He's just been the only one with half a brain to respond and write to, Podesta with advice throughout this entire thing. Him, and there was one email from the president of Starbucks that made sense. And other than that, everybody's in a la-la land over there. Crazy.
Yeah, it is. So something that Julian Assange identified the other day, again in that interview with John Pilger, as being the biggest revelation to him, was in one of the emails, an admittance from officials close to Hillary Clinton that the governments of Saudi Arabia and Qatar are funding ISIS. Not just individuals who live in Saudi Arabia and Qatar, but the actual governments of Saudi Arabia and Qatar are funding ISIS. And of course, this is interesting and unfortunate on many, many levels. But we always hear politicians talk about the need in the Middle East to work with the Saudis and the Qataris, and they might throw in the Emiratis as well. But they're always brought up whenever these grand coalitions are discussed as ways to go after ISIS. And then, of course, there have been all sorts of donations to the Clinton Foundation, and questions about transparency on those, and on pay-for-play allegations surrounding those coming from high-level officials in Saudi Arabia, and in particular, Qatar has come under controversy for that. And then, of course, we also saw the potential connections between the Saudi Arabian government, or at least officials within the Saudi Arabian government, and the 9/11 attacks. And the release of the 28 pages did not alleviate those concerns. So that was definitely a big whopper. I don't know if I agree with Julian Assange that it was the biggest revelation, but the acknowledgement that the governments of Saudi Arabia and Qatar have been funding ISIS, that was definitely a significant thing that came out of these documents being published.
Absolutely. And it's funny because I guess from a foreigner's perspective, that is a big deal. For someone living within the United States, I don't know that it is such a big deal, because we've known this for so long. At least most of us have. There's so much in here that proves that we are, in fact, working with the Saudis to lift ISIS up rather than defeat it. I never proclaimed to be a foreign policy expert, and I would be embarrassed to admit that I don't know as much about foreign policy in that region as I should. However, there's a lot in there about the movings and the workings of these groups, how to combat them, what strategies to employ. As a matter of fact, I believe there's one email in which Hillary Clinton was not even in the State Department, and she was asking Podesta for information on, the Saudis and what they were doing in Libya. So it's a big one. You have to admit, it's a big one. Meanwhile, we're running around scared. ISIS is going to get us. ISIS is going to get us. Meanwhile, we're the ones who are supplying them with their weapons. And it was a multi-billion-dollar deal. So it is a big deal.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily surprising, but just having that verification of it is definitely significant. But a few more topics I want to touch on before we wrap up, and the next one is what we've learned about Hillary Clinton's private email server and Barack Obama and other individuals having knowledge of it. So what have we learned about that from these documents and emails that have been published?
It can literally be pinned down to one email where Donna Brazil writes, did the president just say that he learned about Clinton's email server on the news like everyone else? We've got to clean this up. He's got emails from her non-state.gov email address. He knows very well that she's using an unsecure server to send email. There is no question. He knows exactly what she was doing. It's also very clear that they disposed of these emails very maliciously and with intent, which is why the FBI revelation just blows my mind, because everybody can see it right there. It's one email. You don't really need to read thousands of them. If someone had the ID to give to you, you could read it in black and white for yourself. And nobody disputes the accuracy of it, not even them. So I think that's interesting. There was collusion there, and there was intent there, and she knows very well what she did was wrong. As a matter of fact, near attendant said, has the person who told her it's okay to use a private email server been drawn and quartered yet? And they go back and forth about this several times.
Right, and regardless of what one thinks about the email server scandal and whether it's being blown out of proportion or whether there are other scandals related to the Clintons that are more significant, it does seem obvious that she's been lying about this the whole way through, and that the president hasn't, Barack Obama hasn't been forthright about this. It just seems like there's no way around that. No,
there isn't, and thankfully the American public is starting to see that. I think that's all we've got left. I said yesterday, WikiLeaks is like literally all we have left to wake us up, because we've lost everything else. So God bless Julian Assange.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so something that did get a lot of attention coming out of these WikiLeaks releases, and I think this was asked about at one of the presidential debates. I can't remember which one, but it actually came up at one of the general election debates, and that was Hillary Clinton admitting in private, in paid speeches to large Wall Street banks and large foreign banks, that she has different public and private positions. And some of her comments about open borders and about trade in particular were highlighted, but it seemed like it wasn't just limited to those issues. Of course, we also see this with foreign policy sometimes. So what have we learned about that and about these Wall Street speeches that she refused to lease during the primary campaign?
Well, broadly, we've learned that Hillary Clinton does not have a position on anything. What she has is a team of people who will write what they think the people want to hear. None of the policies, in quotes, that she holds are actually her beliefs. They're crafted by a team using words that they know will have the best effect. She's a market. She's a product. She's a commodity. She's not a person. Very, very clearly. The other thing is they have a really hard time keeping up with her public and, private ideas. She said this and now she's contradicting herself. How do we present it the right way? She does not have a policy that she holds within herself as her own. She has what's the flavor of the month. In terms of the Wall Street speeches, I did read several of them. And they're what you would expect her to be saying to a bunch of Wall Street bankers that are her friends. They don't have anything to do with people or how the people will do or how it will affect the everyday American or the everyday anyone in the world. These are policies that are going to affect the world and not just America. And, they're coming out with a book of them. I would implore everyone to read it because it is eye-opening what's inside of these speeches. And they're not that long. So if you really had about a half hour, you could probably get through it.
Right, and it's also now I haven't read through all of them, so you know better than me. But I'm assuming that it also becomes obvious from these speeches that really what's being bought is access above all else, and it's just another pay-to-play scheme.
Absolutely, and it's very important to Clinton that she works this way because she's never made a dollar doing anything that normal people do. And this entire network is her livelihood, quite literally, power and money. So I agree with you.
Yeah. All right. So are there any major revelations that we haven't gotten to so far?
Every time I start talking about these things, I get off the phone and I say, oh, I should have said this one. I should have said that one. There are so many. I still stand by the Scalia revelations. Justice Scalia, I from reading these emails, it has become clearer and clearer to me that there was definitely some criminal activity going on with the Clinton camp and the Podestas and Justice Scalia. The other thing that's come out that's kind of like sordid is this whole spirit dinner thing that we've, weeks ago I was reading through these and I was saying they talk about cooking, but it's not normal. It's like they talk about it in a way that doesn't make sense in the context of you know what I'm saying? It's just very strange. Right. Now, John Podesta is a cook. He is a chef. He does cook. He likes to do that. But I'm coming over to your house with the pizza and then we'll make risotto. It's just weird. And I was begging people to figure it out. And I think we're getting there. We'll just say that.
All right. So let's look at what the fallout from all of this might be. And I don't just mean in terms of who will win the U.S. election, but I'm talking about what should we expect from WikiLeaks moving forward? What should we expect as far as documents go after the election is held? And what should we expect as far as Julian Assange's future and his safety go?
I think that we should expect more from WikiLeaks on the Clinton Foundation. It's a topic they don't seem to want to let go of. I also feel that there are enough people that are paying attention to this now that it won't just go away. It's not a flavor of the month sort of thing. There are too many people who've invested too much time, myself included, in all of this to just let this stuff die down. And Julian Assange has a meeting tomorrow, another interrogation with the Swedish police. I can only hope and pray for him that justice is done and he is allowed to walk free, although I do think he's safer in the embassy.
Okay. All right, and I, of course, want to mention, before we wrap up, this should be obvious, but just in case it's not, that even though we've been discussing what WikiLeaks has revealed about Hillary Clinton and her campaign and about the DNC, that by no means means that that we like Donald Trump or that we're backing Donald Trump or that we were backing Bernie Sanders or anything of the like. If there were leaks related to them and there were documents related to Donald Trump, we would be glad to discuss those and to figure out what all of those mean as well. It's just that the documents that have been published have related to Hillary Clinton and her very close associates, so that's what we've been discussing, and it has nothing to do with liking or disliking Donald Trump or anything of that sort.
That's awesome. That's awesome that you said that. I think that's great because it is nonpartisan at this point. Honestly, these leaks are nonpartisan. They really are.
Right. Yeah, so I just want to make that clear because I know everyone is on the edge of their seats waiting to see what's going to happen with this election. And if you support one candidate or you support the other candidate or a third-party candidate or you don't support anyone or whatever, people are so on edge about this thing that they'll hear what they want to hear and read what they want to read. So I as clearly as I can make that point, I just want to make sure that anyone listening to this knows that we're not fans of any of these people, but these documents that have been released relate to Hillary Clinton and those around her, so that's why we're talking about those. But on that note, I want to conclude by asking you if there are any resources you recommend people take a look at, and as well for you to remind everybody of what the best ways are to follow your work.
Great. Thank you so much. This has been a really great interview. I think, to be quite honest with you, if you really want a really good look inside of WikiLeaks without doing all the legwork on your own, besides going to my channel at youtube.com/Tracy Beans with a Z, or following me on Twitter by those same names, same Facebook as well, I would go to the Reddit page. Yes, it is the Donald, but they have done a ridiculously amazing job of going through these leaks and really documenting everything and putting together the pieces. You don't have to sign up. You can browse through that thread without a username and read everything to your heart's content. It's not broken by side. It's just the facts. And it's a really good document, step-by-step guide to what's going on.
Okay, great. Well, I want to direct everybody to the show notes page for this episode, which again is at wakeupcallpodcast.com/WikiLeaks-emails. And of course, we will link to all the resources that have been mentioned. Again, the YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Tracy Beans with a Z, and the @TracyBeans Twitter account. Those links will be available from the show notes page. Also, some links to a couple of previous episodes I did with Brian McGlinchey regarding the 28 pages of the 9/11 documents that were released, since we did touch on what was said about the Saudis and the Qataris. So that'll be linked there to perhaps give a little better context to those remarks. And all the other resources, of course, too. So wakeupcallpodcast.com/WikiLeaks-emails. Again, it's the show notes page for this episode. And I want to encourage everybody while they're on our website to subscribe, rate, and review the show on iTunes, or subscribe on Stitcher or another podcatcher of your preference, and to sign up for our email list so you can get all the episodes and stay up to date, and also to follow us on Twitter at WUC Podcast. So, Tracy, thank you so much for joining me today, and I assume that the WikiLeaks documents are going to continue, and there will be more revelations regardless of whether they happen in the next 24 hours before the election, or if they happen after the election, or if there's question about who won the election, whatever. I assume there will still be a lot of WikiLeaks documents to look at and to dig through. So as that happens, hopefully we can chat again and try to make sense of the new documents that will have been released. But in the meantime, thank you so much for helping me to discuss the documents that have been released thus far.
Thanks for having me. This was great. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Wake Up Call podcast.
If you would like to listen to more episodes, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on iTunes, or subscribe on Stitcher, and check out our website at wakeupcallpodcast.com.
There you will find show notes pages and comment sections dedicated to the show. You can also email us at contact@wakeupcallpodcast.com if you're interested in being interviewed for the show or have any other suggestions.
Thank you.